Okay, in the time of COVID, this is probably going to prove that I have way too much time on my hands, but this was a lot of fun. Uh, Here's James' picture of the birds on the wire, and I had seen the video once upon a time that's out there of some birds on wires and interpreting if those were staff lines, what is the music that the birds make. So this was a lot of fun to try to figure out. The first thing to think about was what are these birds on the lines or spaces of these different sort of lines. And what I decided was looking at this bird particularly because he's kind of hunkered down. It's like he's trying so hard to be on the line, not in the space. And then the birds that are facing us with their bellies seem to be proudly trying to take up all the space between the lines. I decided that the birds facing away from us are on the line. The birds facing towards us with their bellies are in the spaces between the lines. And so if you begin to put that onto music, it would look something like this top example, which if I play, we don't know what key the birds are in, right? So that sounds like this. Which isn't bad, but has some dissonance, particularly between the second and third notes, and which repeats in the fourth and fifth notes, right? That typically would have been mitigated, going all the way back to Gregorian chant, when you had dissonant notes, dissonant intervals like that. Often the second note was lowered to sort of mitigate that dissonant sound. So if we assumed that that's what's meant by the spacing of the birds, that there are certain accidentals that we're going to use here. And it is interesting. Note this, the spacing of these birds here is repeated by the spacing of these birds here, which is kind of neat. So if we lower it, we get that repeated there, which I thought was really cool. But then as we go through the rest of the example, then we assume this note here, because we lowered it here, would also be lowered here. But if we go from this lower note to the original note we had here, again, that's a pretty dissonant sound. So if we assume the second note is lowered to mitigate that dissonance, it's a little softer, sounds a little better. Interestingly, though, once we lower that note, get my cursor back here, this note here to the original note here is one of the most dissonant intervals in music. In fact, Gregorian chant singers called that Diabola in Musica, the devil in music, because it was so dissonant, and that was the very first interval that was mitigated by lowering the top note. So if we sort of look at where are the dissonant notes, lower the next note, the second note, to mitigate that dissonance, then we get the bottom line, which I think is a nice improvement. The first line, second line. So I think if we like the second line and assume that's the key the birds are in, then I took the time real quick to write a little song for the birds. So the bird notes are to here, and then I added a little tag just to finish it off. So here's for the birds. This was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.